The story spread fast through American troops like fire in the summer of 1944. People said the Germans had a new super tank, 70 tons of steel, and power armor so thick it could laugh at Sherman shells, and a gun so strong it could blow up anything the Allies had from over 2 kilometers away. Allied intelligence called it the King Tiger. German crews called it unbeatable. American tankers called it their worst nightmare. The first reports came from British troops fighting near Cone in Normandy on July 11, 1944. The 53rd Heavy Panzer Battalion used King Tigers against the Allies. British tank commanders sent radio messages that sounded unreal, tanks bigger than anything they had ever seen, shells bouncing off the front armor like it was unbreakable, German tanks shooting from far away while British guns could not even hit back. The fear hit hard and fast. American intelligence officers put together reports from many sources. The British Second Army sent in battle notes. Soviet spies shared news from the East, where King Tigers had already been used. In August 1944, French resistance fighters said they saw giant tanks on trains moving through France. Every report told the same story. Germany had made a new kind of tank that was better than anything the Allies had. For months, people had whispered about this machine monster. Reports came in from British troops in Normandy. Soviet intelligence said the same thing from the Eastern Front. Every Allied tanker knew the numbers by memory. 180 millimeters of armor on the front of the turret, an 8.8 centimeter gun with a barrel over 6 meters long, and a battle weight heavier than any tracked vehicle. This was not just another tank. This was Germany's answer to the big number of Allied tanks, a monster built to bring back German power on the field. Allied tank crews read reports with growing fear. The King Tiger weighed almost 70 tons, more than twice as much as a Sherman, and its huge 8.8 centimeter gun the big gun on the King Tiger could punch through 150 millimeters of armor from 2,000 meters away. Its front armor was sloped and super thick, 180 millimeters on the turret and 150 on the hull, making it almost impossible for any Allied anti-tank weapon to break through. The fear hit right away. American tank crews who were used to fighting Panzer IVs, or even the scary Panthers, now had to face something totally different. Intelligence reports showed a dark picture. The King Tiger could blow through a Sherman's front armor from far away, while the Sherman could not even shoot back. It might take 4 or 5 Shermans working together to sneak around and destroy one King Tiger, and even then many men would die. It was hard to sleep knowing such a deadly machine was out there. Tank commanders told each other stories from British troops who had seen King Tigers in action. One British officer said he saw his squadron shells bounce off a King Tiger's front armor from 800 meters. Another said he saw a King Tiger blow up 3 Churchill tanks in a row, then drive away hardly damaged. Those stories spread fast through Allied tank units, making the German tanks sound unbeatable. But the fear made sense. The numbers all showed the King Tiger had the upper hand in close fights. A Sherman 75 millimeter gun could not pierce the King Tiger's front armor at any real fighting distance. Even the newer 76 millimeter gun on later Shermans had trouble breaking through the King Tiger's thick sloped metal. The British 17-pounder gun could maybe do it, but only from a good angle and close up, where the German tank usually got the first shot in. In early July 1944, soldiers from an elite panzer division got the first 5 King Tigers sent to Normandy. These tanks showed the best of German tank design. Each one cost 321,500 Reichmarks, the same as 3 smaller tanks, and building one took space that could have made 2 Panthers. These were not normal tanks. They were carefully built killing machines, made to prove that German engineering was still the best at a time when the German Reich badly needed a miracle. Giving out those 5 King Tigers meant more than just firepower. It was a symbol of hope for Germany's leaders and its people. Germany's war minister, Albert Speer, had promised to build more heavy tanks to fight the large number of Allied ones. The Henschel factory in Kassel worked hard to make hundreds of King Tigers, but progress was very slow. Skilled workers were hard to find. Allied bombing kept breaking supply lines, and rare metals like tungsten for armor-piercing shells and molybdenum for armor plates were almost gone. Each finished King Tiger was proof that German industry still pushed forward even when everything was against it. The men chosen to drive these huge tanks were top veterans from the Eastern Front. They were soldiers who had lived through battles like Kursk and had escaped Soviet traps again and again. They were pulled from the fighting in the East to form the heart of the 316th Remote Control Panzer Company. Their belief in German tanks was unshakable. They had seen Tigers crush Soviet T-34s, and now they would prove their strength against the Americans and British. These seasoned men knew tank fighting better than most Allied crews. They understood how to use land and cover, how to choose the best sight lines, and how to make kill zones where enemy tanks would be destroyed before they could get close. Even in weaker tanks, these men were deadly. In King Tigers, they thought nothing could stop them. When they first saw their new tanks, the veterans felt real awe. The King Tiger was massive, 3 meters tall, over 10 meters long with its gun, and weighing almost 70 tons. It was like a steel giant. Its front armor was sloped to make shells slide off like raindrops, and that big 8.8 centimeter KWK-43 gun could destroy anything that showed up in its sight. This was more than a tank. It was a rolling fortress, a machine built to change the war. The crews trained to get used to their new tanks. They learned how to handle its tricky controls. The steering took strength, and the gears had to be changed carefully or they would break. It used a shocking amount of fuel, nearly 190 gallons just to travel about 120 kilometers on roads, and even more when driving off-road. But these problems seemed fine compared to the amazing battle power the King Tiger gave. The orders came in around the middle of July. The King Tigers had to move from their build site to the front lines near Tilly and Saint-Lô. It was not a long trip, maybe 80 kilometers through the French countryside. The crews checked everything before battle, just like their training taught them. They checked oil, tracks, fuel, and shells. Every part was tested, checked again, and signed off as ready for battle. The mechanic said all was good. The company commander looked over the repair logs and saw no issues. These tanks were new, straight from the Henschel factory, made with the best German skill. What could go wrong? The first King Tiger started its trip with full confidence. The Maybach HL230 P30 engine growled loud with 700 horsepower, pushing 70 tons of steel. The driver put it in gear, felt it jump forward, and started toward the front. Behind him, 4 more King Tigers followed, their commander standing proud in the turrets, their crews ready to prove German strength. Then just 10 kilometers down the road, the first trouble hit. The lead tank's gearbox made terrible noises, metal grinding against metal. The driver tried to fix it by changing gears slowly and driving easier, but it didn't help. The gearbox was already breaking under the huge weight. Within minutes, the tank stopped dead on a country road, blocking all the other tanks. The crew got out, shocked. This couldn't be happening, not to Germany's best tank. The commander called for quick repairs, but the mechanics soon brought bad news. The gearbox was completely broken. The inside gears were ruined. The tank had to be towed back to a repair shop for a full gearbox change. That kind of work needed another King Tiger or a giant tow vehicle, but none were close. The Maybach OL1116B transmission inside the King Tiger was almost the same one used in the lighter 45-ton Panther. German engineers hadn't made the gearbox stronger to handle the extra 25 tons of weight. So, when the King Tiger moved at 70 tons, the gears wore out fast. Teeth broke, bearings failed, and parts inside burned up. This first breakdown was not bad luck or one bad tank. It was a real design problem. 1 tank gone, 4 left. The line formed again and kept moving. They told themselves it was just a rare issue, maybe a mistake in 1 tank. The war was still going on. They couldn't just sit there. The front lines needed them. The Americans and British were pushing forward and every hour counted. The last 4 King Tigers kept going, their leaders a little less sure, but still focused on getting to battle. 15 kilometers later, another King Tiger started having engine problem. The Maybach engine that worked fine in the 45-ton Panther was way too weak for 70 tons of weight. It only had about 10 horsepower for each ton, far too low for a tank that needs to push many tons. When the King Tiger climbed a small hill, the engine got hot fast. The cooling system was never great and couldn't handle the heat from an engine working full power just to move at normal speed. The driver saw the temperature gauge go into the red and told his commander. They slowed down to cool the engine, but it didn't help. The coolant began to boil. Steam poured out of the back, and soon the engine locked up. The pistons inside got stuck from the heat, and the tank stopped with smoke rising from its back. German engineers had known from the start that the engine was too weak. The Maybach HL230P30 made 700 horsepower, the same as in the much lighter Panther. They had plans for a new Maybach 234 engine with 800 horsepower, but delays meant most King Tigers still got the weaker one. The result was easy to guess. When run hard, the engine got too hot. The cooling system could not keep up, and the parts failed one after another. 2 tanks broken, 3 still moving. Now everyone saw the pattern, and fear began to grow among the crews. These were not random problems. These were deep design failures. The King Tiger, even with its thick armor and strong gun, had one deadly weakness. It was too heavy for its own parts. The engine, the gearbox, and the cooling system were all working harder than they were built to. On the test field, it looked unbeatable, but in real battle, it was a disaster. The third tank made it only 20 more kilometers before its final drive broke. The huge gears that connected the gearbox to the tracks could not take the force needed to move 70 tons over rough ground. The gear teeth snapped, the drive locked up, and the tank stopped cold. The crew stared in shock. This same final drive issue would ruin many King Tigers later. A report from the Heavy Panzer Battalion 506 in September 1944 told the whole story. 12 final drives failed after only 50 to 100 kilometers of use. The sprocket teeth broke off under stress, and the track parts kept breaking again and again. The commander of the battalion begged weapons officials for help. 3 tanks were now dead. Only 2 still moved. The company leader now had no good choices. Of the 5 King Tigers that left that morning, only 2 still worked, and they had not even made it to the front. They had not shot once. They had not seen any enemy. All they did was drive 80 kilometers on roads, and 60% of them had already fallen apart. The commander gave the only order he could. He told the last 2 tanks to drive slower, hoping their engines and transmissions would hold together long enough to reach the German lines. Behind them sat 3 of Germany's most advanced tanks, stopped not by Allied guns, but by their own bad design. The 4th King Tiger broke down 30 kilometers from the front. This time the problem was in the suspension. The fancy overlapping wheels meant to carry the tank's huge weight broke. A wheel bearing locked up. The wheel froze, the track came off, and the tank stopped, leaning to one side, unable to move. 4 were gone, 1 still running. Only 1 King Tiger out of the 5 finally made it to the German lines near Tilly. 1 out of 5. A success rate of just 20%. The crew of that last tank looked back at the trail of dead machines and understood the painful truth. Germany's so-called super tank turned out not to be super at all. It was over-designed, under-tested, and full of serious problems. But the story did not stop there. What happened to these 5 King Tigers showed a bigger problem that would happen again and again. These tanks, with body numbers 28,001 through 28,005, were the first King Tigers ever made, built in March 1944 with early Porsche turrets. They were given to the 316 Funklink Panzer Company, a special unit that used radio-controlled explosive vehicles driven from Tiger tanks. The unit's job was to blow open strong enemy defenses using remote bombs. When the group went to Normandy in June 1944, the 5 King Tigers stayed behind at Chateau d'Un, about 200 kilometers from the front lines. They were seen as too unreliable to fight. The unit commander, who needed working tanks fast, decided to switch to 9 Sternmutz assault guns instead. These were ready, steady, and useful. While the King Tigers sat unused, wasting away, by the middle of August 1944, as Allied troops moved quickly across France, those left behind King Tigers turned into a problem German forces could not fix. They did not have the giant tow trucks needed to move 70-ton machines, and they had no spare parts for their broken engines or gearboxes. The only choice left was to blow them up before the Allies could take them. So demolition charges were set, the turrets were blasted off, and the empty shells were left along French roads. Within days, American soldiers moving forward found the wrecks. The first crews approached carefully, thinking there might be an ambush waiting, where the deadly 8.8-centimeter guns ready to fire. But instead, they found silence. The tanks were empty, their hatches open, their crews long gone. The Germans could not fix or move these heavy machines, so they destroyed what they could and left the rest. American tankers could hardly believe their eyes. They had been told these tanks could not be beaten. They had been warned that seeing a King Tiger meant almost a certain death. But here they were, silent giants, beaten not by American weapons, but by their own broken German design. The first King Tiger that American troops found, still in one piece, became a huge source of information for them. Special intelligence teams from the First Army showed up with cameras, measuring tools, and cutting gear. Soon, Army engineers and British officers joined in to help. The inspection took days, and their reports were sent all through Allied command. Engineers and experts climbed over every inch of the heavy abandoned tank, trying to learn everything they could. They wanted to know what it could do, where it was weak, and how to destroy it. What they found shocked everyone. The armor was massive, 180 millimeters thick on the turret front, sloped 80 degrees from vertical, and 150 millimeters thick on the front hull, sloped 50 degrees. This kind of protection could stop nearly every American and British tank shell in service. Rounds that could easily go through a Panther tank just bounced off the King Tiger's front armor. Tests on captured armor plates proved it. Sherman's 75 millimeter shells could not pierce it at any range. Even the stronger 76 millimeter shells had a hard time. The gun was just as frightening. The 8.8 centimeter KWK-43 could punch through 5 inches of armor from 2,000 meters. It had better range and power than any Allied tank gun. In a long-distance fight, the King Tiger would win every time. It fired shells in 2 parts, one for the shell and one for the powder, which slowed how fast it could shoot, but gave it higher speed and better armor piercing. The barrel was 6.3 meters long, 71 times its width, and every part of the gun, from the breech to the recoil system, was built with great skill. The sighting equipment amazed the engineers. German Zeiss optics were the best in the world. King Tiger crews could spot and hit targets at distances where Allied tankers could barely see. But when the engineers looked deeper at the drivetrain, they started to realize the real problem. The transmission was almost the same one used in the lighter Panther tank, which weighed 25 tons less. The gears were not much stronger, and the bearings were not much bigger. German engineers had basically taken a transmission made for a medium tank and tried to make it work in a super heavy tank. And the result was exactly what you'd expect. It broke under pressure. During long use, the transmission parts just couldn't take it. When American engineers looked inside the captured tank, they found proof everywhere. The gear teeth were worn down, showing too much strain. The bearings had deep scratches and marks. The synchronizer rings were worn almost flat. One American mechanical engineer from Detroit who studied it wrote that no car maker in America would ever approve this kind of drivetrain for such a heavy vehicle. The design was just not strong enough. And the engine problem was even worse. The Maybach HL230P30 engine made 700 horsepower, which was fine for the 45-ton Panther tank. But in the 70-ton King Tiger, it was far too weak. That gave it only 10 horsepower for every ton, while the American Sherman, with its 400 horsepower engine and 30-ton weight, had over 13 horsepower per ton. So the huge German tank was actually slower and less mobile than the smaller one. American engineers worked out how far it could go with its fuel, and the results were shocking. The King Tiger carried 860 liters of fuel in its tanks and could only travel about 120 kilometers on roads if everything went perfectly. Off-road, it dropped to maybe 80 or 90, and in real battle, with quick turns and hard driving, it could run out of fuel in less than 60 kilometers. A Sherman tank, by comparison, carried 660 liters but could go about 200 kilometers on roads. The King Tiger burned 30% more fuel while going 40% less distance. That was a nightmare for German supply lines. A unit with King Tigers needed almost twice as many fuel trucks as an American one. And in 1944, when Germany was running out of fuel, this was a disaster. The cooling system was another weak spot. Engineers checked the radiators, coolant lines, and fans, and found that while the design was fine for normal use, the King Tiger almost never ran under normal conditions. Its weak engine had to work full power all the time, and that made it overheat constantly. The radiators just couldn't get rid of the heat fast enough. The coolant would start to boil and pressure would rise until gaskets burst and the whole engine locked up solid. From the Eastern Front backed this up. Soviet troops had captured 2 King Tigers in August 1944 near Sandom in Poland and sent them to the Kubinka testing ground near Moscow for deep study. The Soviet engineers put the tanks through the same tough tests they used for their own machines, and what they found showed just how bad the King Tiger's mechanical problems really were. Even while being moved to Kubinka, both tanks broke down several times. The cooling system couldn't handle warm weather, and engine heat went above safe levels again and again. One tank's gearbox failed completely on the way, and the other had such bad suspension trouble that it needed a full rebuild. Even with captured German spare parts, it never worked right. Once at Kubinka, the engineers ran full field tests. They drove the King Tigers over different types of ground, checked how much fuel they burned, tested their top speed, and measured how long they could run before something broke. The results were terrible. The tanks broke down every 10 to 15 kilometers in hot weather. The cooling system failed anytime the air temperature went over 30 degrees Celsius. The gearbox also overheated since it didn't have enough cooling, and the outside heat made it worse. The Soviets also fired captured German 88mm guns at the tank's armor to see how tough it really was. They found the King Tiger's own gun could actually punch through another King Tiger's turret at only 400 meters. This showed how strong the gun was, but it also proved the armor wasn't as unbeatable as German propaganda claimed. The welding quality was worse than the earlier Tiger I, even though German builders had worked carefully. Another huge problem was the final drive, the part that connects the transmission to the tracks. Both American and Soviet tests show that these gears had to carry enormous torque to move 70 tons. And when the tank tried to turn quickly or reverse under combat stress, the gears broke again and again. Many captured King Tigers had final drive parts shattered or stripped beyond repair. The problem got so bad that German field commanders started warning Tiger crews not to make sharp turns or any extra moves that could strain the final drives. American engineers put all this information into detailed technical reports. One of the most important was Intelligence Bulletin No. 184, released by First Army in September 1944. It included a full breakdown of the King Tiger's design and performance, and was shared across Allied tank units so commanders knew exactly what they were up against. The report's conclusion was shocking. The King Tiger, though deadly in direct battle, was really its own worst enemy. Its massive weight made it a constant maintenance problem. Its weak engine limited how far it could travel. Its transmission needed endless care, and its suspension easily jammed with mud. In winter, freezing temperatures could lock its many overlapping wheels solid. The final analysis said a King Tiger in a good defensive spot could be terrifying. Its gun and armor gave it serious advantages, but if it had to move for long or fight on the offensive, it almost always broke down before reaching the fight. The farther it traveled, the more likely it was to fail, and rough ground only made things worse. This changed how American tank commanders fought. Instead of treating the King Tiger like an unbeatable monster, they learned to see it as a strong but fragile machine. The trick wasn't to fight it head-on, but to make it move, to make it use up its power and wear out its own parts. Every mile it rolled increased the odds something would break. Every hill overheated its engine, every sharp turn chewed up its gears. American engineers also learned the King Tiger was too heavy to cross most bridges. Its weight was around 70 tons, and even though it had wide tracks, its ground pressure was still high. Bridges that could carry 50 tons collapsed under it. Rivers that smaller German tanks could cross became walls for the King Tiger. That meant it could only move on certain roads, making its routes easy to predict and perfect for Allied planes to attack. Fuel was another nightmare. The King Tiger burned about 190 gallons just to go 120 kilometers on roads. Off-road, it could use almost twice that. Meanwhile, a Sherman tank could go more than 200 kilometers on the same amount of fuel. This meant King Tigers needed huge amounts of fuel and support.
something Germany just couldn't keep up with by late 1944. And the real proof of how bad things had gotten was in production numbers. Germany made only 492 King Tigers in total during the entire war. They started building them in January 1944 and stopped in March 1945. Only one was finished in 1943, then 379 in 1944, and 112 in 1945 before the line shut down for good. When you compare that to 35,000 Panzer IVs, 6,000 Panthers, or the 50,000 Sherman tanks made by America alone, the difference is staggering. Every King Tiger used up enough resources to build 3 Panthers or 5 Panzer IVs. The math of war industry was brutal, and the Allies were winning. Allied bombing made the problem even worse. The Royal Air Force hit the Henschel factory in Kassel again and again through 1944. Bombing raids in September and October destroyed important machines, stopped assembly lines, and killed experienced workers. Production dropped from over 100 King Tigers a month in the summer to barely 30 a month by the end of the year. Every bombing run meant weeks of lost time, as workers cleaned up wreckage, fixed tools, and tried to start again. When the 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion reached the Eastern Front in August 1944, they brought 45 King Tigers with them. But only 8 were still running when they got to the battlefield. 37 broke down just getting there. 37 brand new tanks from the factory, already useless before firing even once. This wasn't an army ready to win. This was an army watching its best weapons fall apart from the inside out. The battalion had loaded up at Paderborn on August 5th, headed for southeastern Poland. The trip was about 800 kilometers by rail, but even moving them by train caused problems. The King Tiger was too heavy for normal train cars. They needed special, heavy flatbeds to carry them. Loading and unloading took special ramps, and the weight had to be spread just right or the train cars could break. Some King Tigers were damaged right there during loading when ramps gave way under all that weight. Once they got off the trains near the Vistula River, the battalion tried to drive 50 kilometers to their assigned battle positions. This short 50-kilometer move turned into a total disaster. First, the final drive started breaking. Tanks stopped moving as the drive sprockets failed under all that weight. Then the transmission started to go. Next, gears stripped, bearings locked, and clutches burned out in just 2 days after starting the road march. 37 of the 45 King Tigers were stuck waiting for repairs. The 8 that actually made it to the front went straight into battle against Soviet forces trying to grow their bridgehead at Baranov-Sandomierski on August 11th and 12th, 1944. These King Tigers fought T-38-5 tanks in close-range combat near the town of Ogladov. 3 King Tigers were destroyed in an ambush. Soviet tanks hidden behind cover shot them from the sides where their armor was weaker. The shells hit the turret ammo and caused explosions that killed most of the crews. This fight forced a major change in German tank tactics. Before that battle, crews kept their main gun shells in the turret so they could load faster. But after Ogladov, they realized a side hit there meant instant death. So they moved all the ammo into the hull racks. This slowed reload speed and dropped total rounds from 84 to 68, but it saved lives if the turret was hit. By March 1945, German Army records showed that King Tigers had a 59% readiness rate, which meant nearly half were broken down waiting for repairs at any time. Even so, that was slightly better than some other tanks. The Panzer IV had 62% readiness, and the Panther just 48%. So by the end of the war, the King Tiger was actually more reliable than the Panther, though still worse than the simpler, older tanks. This small improvement didn't happen by luck. Henschel engineers worked side by side with the field units, studying every problem. They strengthened seals to stop oil leaks, fixed gasket failures that caused coolant loss, and made stronger drive parts that could handle more stress. They also made a new track design with wider lengths to spread out the weight, and improved training for drivers so they wouldn't push the tank too hard. Finally, better maintenance routines helped crews find and fix small issues before they turned into total breakdowns. By early 1945, the King Tiger was a lot more dependable than the ones built before it. But by then, Germany just didn't have the fuel, spare parts, or factories left to keep even that small number running right. The Battle of the Bulge became the real test to see if the King Tiger could hold up in action. Kampfgruppe Piper, leading the German attack in December 1944, had about 45 King Tigers from the Heavy SS Panzer Battalion 501 attached to the 1st SS Panzer Division. The plan was to rush forward, grab the bridges over the Meuse River, cut off Allied troops, and capture their fuel to keep going. Piper's group rolled into Belgium on December 16, 1944, moving through the Lossum Gap with around 4,800 soldiers, 600 vehicles, and all those massive tanks. At first, everything seemed to go great. American defenses were thin, and the first towns fell fast.
Piper's men took Honsfeld and even captured an American fuel depot so they could refuel, but problems started right away. About 12 King Tigers couldn't even leave the starting area because of mechanical failures. The rest pushed on towards Stavelot, where they took a bridge over the Amblev River on December 18th. From there, they drove toward La Glaise, a small Belgian village that became Piper's last stand. Only 6 King Tigers made it all the way. The others had broken down or were left behind to guard crossroads and bridges. Tank number 213 was one of the 6. Its commander, SS Obersturmführer Helmut Dollinger, had to take over after his first tank broke down. This one had been crewed by SS Scharführer Franz Fassmann. The King Tigers took up defensive positions around La Glaise, expecting the American counterattack. Tank 213 and Tank 221, commanded by SS Unterführer Georg Hantusch, parked on high ground at Wiemont Farm just south of town. They had a perfect view of the road from Toipon, giving them clear firing lines on any American tanks coming their way. On December 21, 1944, the Americans struck. Task Force Major and Task Force Lovelady from the 3rd Armored Division rolled up the valley with about 25 tanks. The King Tigers fired first from extreme range, from about 2,000 meters away. At that distance, the American tank guns couldn't do much. The King Tigers had a huge advantage, but the Americans didn't stop. They used hills and trees for cover, moved forward bit by bit, and kept firing back harder and harder. One American shell hit Tank 213's main gun barrel and damaged it so badly that it couldn't shoot anymore. No one knows for sure how it happened. Some say it was a lucky hit that struck the barrel straight on. Others think it got hit many times until the damage added up and made the gun useless. Whatever really happened, Tank 213 was no longer able to fight. Dollinger was hit in the head, probably from metal fragments that broke through the armor. He hid in the basement of Wiemont Farm while his crew tried to fix the tank. But by then, Kampfgruppe Piper's whole situation was hopeless. They were cut off with no supplies, almost no fuel or shells, and completely surrounded by American troops. Piper had no choice. On December 23rd, he got permission to pull back, but they couldn't use their tanks because they were totally out of fuel. So Piper ordered everyone to retreat on foot, leaving all the tanks and trucks behind. About 800 men made it out that night, crossing through the dark, snowy hills to reach German lines near One. 770 survivors finally met up with their division behind them. At La Glaise, Piper's group left 135 armored vehicles, 6 King Tigers, 13 Panthers, 6 Panzer IVs, and more than 50 half-tracks and other vehicles. Demolition crews tried to blow them up, but time ran out, and the Americans were already moving in. A lot of the vehicles, including Tank 213, were captured almost undamaged. After the fighting, the U.S. Army went through La Glaise collecting all the German tanks. Tank 213 was hard to move because it sat on a narrow farm road. In July 1945, the American troops got ready to tow it away to be scrapped, but a local cafe owner named Jenny Genin-Duez stepped in. She reportedly offered the American soldiers a bottle of cognac in exchange for the tank. Her goal was to save it. She wanted the tank to stay in La Glaise as a memorial to the village's suffering during the war. The Americans agreed, so Tank 213 was moved to the village square in front of the church. It stayed there for many years, slowly falling apart, until local preservation work began in 1951. Parts of the damaged gun barrel were replaced in 1975, using pieces from Panther tanks that had been abandoned nearby. Later, the tank was fully restored and repainted, then moved to its current location outside the December 44 Museum, where it is the only King Tiger displayed on its original battlefield in Europe. Another King Tiger, tank number 332, has a well-documented story too. It came from the heavy SS Panzer Battalion 501 and was abandoned near Petit Coupe in Belgium on December 24, 1944. Sergeant Glenn George of the 740th Tank Battalion found the intact tank while on patrol. His unit was attached to the 82nd Airborne Division, defending the northern flank of the Bulge. Tank 332 was in very good condition, even though the crew had tried to destroy it before leaving. The Americans arrived in time to stop total demolition. The tank was recovered by the 463rd Ordnance Evacuation Company and taken to Spa, Belgium, then shipped through Antwerp to the United States. It reached Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland for detailed study. American engineers examined it carefully, just like earlier captured tanks. They measured it, photographed it, tested it, and documented every part. The tank stayed at Aberdeen for around 40 years, displayed outside, where weather slowly damaged it. In August 1991, Tank 332 was moved to Fort Knox, Kentucky for display at the Patton Museum of Cavalry and Armor.
Technicians cut open the left side of the hull to make a cutaway educational exhibit showing the interior layout, ammunition storage, and mechanical systems. This let visitors see how a King Tiger worked and how the crew operated. Later, Tank 332 was moved to Fort Benning, Georgia, where it remains in the U.S. Army Armor and Cavalry Collection. It is the only complete King Tiger captured by American forces during World War II. The psychological effect on German tank crews was crushing. These men had been promised an unbeatable war machine that would make Germany dominant on the battlefield. Instead, they got a mechanical disaster that broke down all the time, drank fuel like crazy, and needed special recovery vehicles that hardly ever existed. The difference between what they were told and what really happened crushed even the most experienced crews. For American tankers, the change in understanding was huge. In July 1944, just hearing the name King Tiger caused fear. Intelligence reports made it seem almost unstoppable. British combat reports called it invincible, and every rumor made it even scarier. By December 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, American crews had learned the real truth. Yes, the King Tiger was dangerous in direct combat, but it was also likely to be out of fuel, broken down, or abandoned by its crew after mechanical failure. The so-called invincible monster turned out to be a flawed weapon. American after-action reports from the Bulge showed that more King Tigers were found abandoned because of mechanical problems or empty fuel tanks than were actually destroyed by Allied fire. Tank crews reported finding King Tigers by the roadside with tracks off, engines seized, or transmissions failed. Some were abandoned with only minor damage that could have been easily fixed on more reliable tanks. But the King Tiger's complexity made field repairs almost impossible without special tools and trained technicians. Interrogations of captured German crews revealed how serious the problem was. Drivers said the gearbox needed constant, careful shifting to avoid damage. Any fast maneuvers or emergency speed changes risked breaking the transmission. Commanders said they couldn't count on the tanks to finish long moves. Every march had the plan for breakdowns and recovery. Maintenance teams explained that fixing a King Tiger required special tools, rare parts, and skilled mechanics. A thrown track on a Sherman could be fixed in an hour by the crew using basic tools, but a thrown track on a King Tiger, with its overlapping wheels and complicated suspension, could take a full day with specialized equipment. The overlapping wheel design meant that to replace one inner wheel, you first had to remove several outer wheels. In winter, mud and ice froze between the wheels, making repairs almost impossible in the field. If the transmission failed, it had to be completely replaced, which took heavy lifting gear and several days of work. The transmission alone weighed more than half a ton. Removing it required special jacks and hoists. Installing a new one needed precise alignment and careful adjustment. Most field maintenance teams did not have the right equipment or skills to do this work. A King Tiger with a broken transmission usually had to be towed to a rear workshop if a recovery vehicle strong enough to move 70 tons was even available. The bigger lesson came from production numbers, showing that industrial capacity determined who could win. Germany used the resources of 3 medium tanks to build just one King Tiger. Meanwhile, America could build 11 Sherman tanks with the same resources. For every King Tiger Germany could send to the front, America sent 11 Sherman tanks that were more reliable, easier to fix, and could actually reach the battlefield. American factories produced tanks faster than Germany could keep up. The Chrysler Tank Arsenal in Detroit built 18,000 Sherman tanks from 1942 to 1945. One single American factory made more tanks than Germany ever made King Tigers. Ford Motor Company built over 1,000 Sherman tanks each month at peak. General Motors, American Locomotive Company, and other factories added tens of thousands more. This production advantage went beyond numbers. American factories could replace losses quickly. A destroyed Sherman could be replaced in weeks. A destroyed King Tiger could not be replaced at all in the last months of the war. German logistics struggled to supply fuel to existing tanks, let alone replacement vehicles. The Americans who captured and studied King Tigers learned important lessons that influenced post-war tank design. Reliability mattered more than raw power. Simplicity was better than complicated systems. Sustainability was more important than capability. These ideas guided American tank design for decades. The M48, M60, and the M1 Abrams all focused on being reliable and easy to maintain requirements
learned from examining German over-engineering made American tank designers realize that the most powerful gun was useless if the tank could not reach the battlefield. The thickest armor offered no protection if the vehicle broke down before engaging the enemy. The most advanced technology counted for nothing if field mechanics could not maintain it. These fundamental truths, learned from studying the King Tiger's repeated failures, became core principles of American military vehicle design. The King Tiger remains famous today, appearing in films, video games, and popular culture as the ultimate German tank. That reputation is partly true, but not the full story. In direct combat, properly positioned and adequately supplied, the King Tiger was indeed fearsome. British tankers Ken II, who fought in Normandy, described encountering a King Tiger as terrifying. Its massive size, thick armor, and powerful gun combined to dominate any engagement where it could be effectively deployed. But that scenario represented only a tiny fraction of actual wartime conditions. The far more common reality mirrored the experience of those first 5 tanks in July 1944. Long marches, mechanical stress, inadequate logistics, and inevitable breakdown plagued them. Of the 492 King Tigers produced, the vast majority were lost to mechanical failure, fuel shortages, or abandonment rather than destruction in combat. This was not a weapon that changed the course of the war. It symbolized Germany's inability to match Allied industrial power. For the American soldiers who discovered those first abandoned King Tigers in the summer of 1944, the experience was transformative. They had feared German technological superiority, worried they were outmatched, and then confronted the reality. The most advanced German tank could not complete an 80-kilometer road march without catastrophic mechanical failure. The supposedly invincible superweapon could not reach the battlefield under its own power. The lesson about Germany's fate became obvious. A nation that could not build reliable tanks, could not fuel its armies, could not maintain its equipment, could not win a war of industrial attrition against the combined might of America, Britain, and the Soviet Union. The broken King Tigers proved it beyond doubt. Those abandoned tanks served as powerful symbols. American industrial might and mechanical reliability had defeated German technological sophistication. The war would be won not by the best tank, but by the largest number of tanks that actually worked. That lesson, paid for in blood across multiple continents, would shape military thinking for generations. The King Tiger's true legacy was not its brief moments of combat effectiveness, but its demonstration that sophisticated engineering without reliable execution was ultimately worthless. That was the real story of the King Tiger.